all of the fun of gambling without any of the boring math. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Mortals Book Reviews in the new year, 2025. Happy New Year. I hope you had a very Merry Christmas at that as well. I am indeed recording here live on the 1st of January, 2025. And what better way to welcome in the new year than for me to reveal to you my inner degenerate gambler. Okay, no, I'm not going to do that. I do have one, but we're not going to reveal that today. We will be talking about some other degenerate gamblers in this book here, though. Take The Hindmost, A History of Financial Speculation by Edward Chancellor. So this book was published in 1999, 400 pages in length, and probably took me about 8 hours reading. It's all notes in here. It's just notes. You'd think maybe something related to financial speculation would have a lot of graphs and numbers and statistics, but no, you're not actually going to find that in here. What you're actually going to find is a series of snapshots across history of financial speculation, so-called bubbles. So this presents not only the instances of craziness, but also the feeling of the time, how they arose, what the interaction between governments and people, technologies of the time, all relating to these bubbles, which will be the things like the Tulip Mania in Holland in the, I think that was 1500s to 1600s period, somewhere in there, of the Gilded Age in America, which was the 1800s, think of Mark Twain era, of things like the Japanese financial bubble, in the late 1980 period. What else do we have? The South Sea bubble, which was related to England in the 1800s period. You're already thinking like, Kyron, why are you struggling with this? It's because there's so many of these damn bubbles that picked up in this book. It is wild how many were actually in here across history. So it's not, as I mentioned, not super heavy on statistics, so you're not going to see actual numbers of it rose this percentage, fell by this percentage, other than some very basic ones. No graphs, no tables, no anything like that. This is more related to the feeling, I guess. I found it quite in-depth in terms of the structure of how it was set out, and we do have 9 chapters here with titles such as Stock Jobbing in Change Alley, The Projecting Age of the 1690s, The Never to be Forgot or Forgiven South Sea Scheme, Fool's Gold, The Emerging Market of the 1820s, Cowboy Capitalism from Bretton Woods to Michael Milken. There's many of these ages that he captures in here. I guess 8 of them in total is what I would say just from these chapters. So it's pretty extensive. Let's jump on to some of the themes and questions which will reveal some interesting stuff that has happened throughout the ages of financial speculation. What I want to focus on here is a couple of different questions that arise, I think, from this book. One, which is, do financial bubbles occur throughout history? Yes, this one definitely proves that. What is their structure? Why do they occur? Can they be stopped? Are they good, bad, neutral phenomena? Let's dive into some of these questions, which I think this book really answers for us. So what's unquestionable is that financial bubbles occur. That's put to bed, put to rest. These things definitely do happen. So they typically, and this is my own kind of reading between the lines of similarities of what occurred in these, because he doesn't lay it out in a step-by-step structure of like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. This is more what I've taken from reading of all of these financial bubbles and going like, okay, these seem to be some similarities. So typically in an economy that is doing well due to increased productivity, aka during the Dutch Golden Age, so think of the Dutch East India or Dutch West India trading companies, these places where they were just raking in ridiculous profits. I think they're the most profitable companies in history and had the largest financial capitalizations due to their trading of spices and things like that. And I've done some book reviews on these spice wars and things like this before. The Tulip Mania occurred during then. So that was when the tulip prices of bulbs got up to ridiculous levels. We have a new financial market or innovations emerge. So this would be the things of inventions of brokers, stock exchanges, derivatives, leverage, and this is common across all of the ages. Easy for retail to access, so this being, just financial participants such as myself or the average layperson. So this is where you'll see coffee houses were proliferating in the England bubbles just in general. This was a pretty common place for retail people to come in and be able to get in. We have information dissemination, so radio during the American Roaring 20s, for example. And with a government without much regulation, or perhaps too much regulation, too much meddling, or an inability to enforce their laws which they're trying to regulate and meddle in. And we see this with the Japanese government and officials playing with the currency and the laws to encourage investment only in Japan during the 1980s Japanese bubble. So all of this is, kind of broke it into 4 stages. You have the kind of formation when times are good, people have extra cash to play around, and so they're going like, I'm going to financially speculate, aka gamble, aka invest. There's a very thin line between these 3 words. We then see these bubbles start to form, and they get stronger, and there's these self-feedbacking loops of people making more money, and they're starting to create these very interesting mechanisms for how these bubbles start to go. We get to this crazy mania stage where it's like everyone's making bank money, hand over fist, everyone's loving life. It then pops, and we have the aftermath of usually pretty big drawdowns of 50 to 80%. Seem to be around the rough ranges that these bubbles burst down to. So why do they occur? Well, it starts with a question, I guess, about investment, speculation, and gambling. We have some funny little definitions right at the start here to try and distinguish between these. I'll read out a tiny little quote here, which you can find in the preface on page XI, so page 9 in the preface. Similar definite problems of definition are encountered in distinguishing speculation from gambling. While a bad investment may be a speculation, a poorly executed speculation is often described as a gamble. And then the psychologies of speculation and gambling are almost indistinguishable. Both are dangerously addictive habits which involve an appeal to fortune, are often accompanied by delusional behavior, and are dependent for success on the control of emotions. So there's a kind of multitude of factors that I think played in with it. What is an investment versus gambling? I think goes into things like how much research effort went into something, the time period of holding it, the range of expected returns, the structural setup of the market, etc. Ultimately, it's rooted in consciousness. We're conscious human beings, therefore we act on self-interest, and a lot of this is evolutionary in nature. And therefore, the human self-independence decision-making is also getting mixed in with our desire to do better, to have more, to accumulate status and wealth and things like this, tempered with that we are humans and we have a lot of emotional mixes. So you've got these 2 forces, 1, self-interest, and then 2, regular human emotions playing together and interacting in markets. So there is something called the efficient market hypothesis, and this is all getting to this question, why do these things occur? Well, we have markets, we're bartering. I think there's undeniable that stuff happens. You can never stamp that out. Children will barter with sticks on a playground, for example, and stones and random stuff. So this is innate in our nature. What the efficient market hypothesis, and this is from some economists, postulate, which is that, let me get this exactly right, that the all asset prices reflect all available data. Now, we can quibble on definitions, but essentially this is saying that the price of something is always what it should be priced at. So even if it jumps from $10 to $100 within a day, that is reflecting all the available data that is on this asset, and that $100 price is the kind of fair value of the efficient market hypothesis. Efficiently, we're marketing this price increase because more productivity is going to come, etc., etc. going on from that. Now, I think this is kind of retarded, to be honest. Once again, you can quibble on definitions with related to some of these things, but is it irrational greed or rational people making poor analysis when prices go to these ridiculous levels and then they go up and then they go down rather rapidly? I take one of my favorite memes is the risk I took was calculated, but man, am I bad at math. And I think that sums up a lot of this really, really nicely, which is, yeah, sure, there's you could say that the market is efficient and that prices, people get in at the price they deserve and that the prices are just reflective of what people want. But I think people are irrational and therefore the markets become irrational as well. So I err on that side of things. The adjectives to describe speculators are things like frenzied, mad, wild, exuberant, plague-stricken, walking ghosts, if things go wrong. And I think that you can describe market prices when they go into these bubble periods as the prices exhibit similarly chaotic behavior, non-reflective of the underlying asset which they are speculating on. So I think that's personal opinion there, what I gained from this book. Can they be stopped? I don't think you can stamp out human emotions. We have a lot of bots trading in markets nowadays, for example. I don't think that stops human emotions filtering into the bots trading, for example. I think there's still implicit assumptions and there's ultimately still humans behind it, and they can turn it off and, sell, buy, hold, whatever it is. I think those still happen in financial markets in these bubbles. And I'm talking about just these particular bubbles, not the markets as a whole over a 50-year time period or a rolling average of a decade or anything like that. Just talking about these specific instances in time. So I don't think you can stamp out investing, speculation / gambling because they are on the spectrum. Most people, if you had to ask them, is investment... Actually, I'm jumping forward. I'll leave that for a second. I don't think you can stamp it out. They are the same thing. Even though governments throw some half-assed or perhaps even full-assed rules at people, regulations, laws, they either get around them or they flaunt them despite the government, and they can't enforce them. There's people just do it in a different name. It didn't talk much about this in the book, but many governments and ideologies over time have tried to stamp out financial speculation in markets and to control markets. Let's think particularly of the USSR, which had the central control. We're going to control prices, which will stop the bourgeoisie from exploiting the peasants and things like this. And in the end, black markets just emerged, and you have these just ridiculous untruths or distorted realities where the government says it's this thing, but in reality it's this price or it's this thing, and they just don't match. You can't control these things. So that's an extreme case, but you also have things like tariffs, import-export bans. So the different types of bubbles, the thing that makes me think that they can't be stopped is these different bubbles have occurred over various different time periods in history. This book only goes back to the 1500s where we have decent data on this, but you can bet your ass this was happening in ancient Egypt. That occurred in different periods of time, under different financial conditions, under different governments trying to control them in various ways or not control them in various ways. And I just don't think they can be stopped. There was this great point in the book where it gives a quote from an economic Yale professor, an economist, that thought that the prohibition, so this was the clamping down of alcohol, particularly, I believe it was the 1920s in America, or maybe it was 1910s, I don't know that period exactly well. He thought that prohibition would make the country more productive because you'd have less people drinking, and that this would therefore make the country more productive. Ultimately, what happened, crime families arose. People spent all their time trying to find ways to find alcohol instead of actually working. And so, that has never stopped anyone. Let's leave it at that. I don't think these things can be stopped. Is this good, bad, or neutral? Once again, it depends on the definition. If you asked, I think the average person on the street, is investing your money a good thing? They'd probably say yeah. If you ask them, is gambling your money a good thing? They'd probably say no. And then, is speculating a good or bad thing? Maybe they'd say in the middle. That's because speculation is just kind of a riskier form of investment or a safer form of gambling. so I think it just depends on your point of view. If you're asking with regards to those three, this book is on financial speculation, so you're probably going to get this right down the middle of the road opinion on whether it's good or bad. I view them more as a force of nature. They're impartial and unstoppable, these bubbles. So, and financial speculation arising from that. I don't think you can control the people, so you're going to have these financial bubbles popping up. The question is this harmful, deleterious to the market / the country / the world as a whole? I think our actions can exacerbate the kind of energy or destructiveness or perhaps productivity that this energy is creating. This financial speculation is to channel it to productive or destructive purposes. So compare the Hurricane Katrina effects in New Orleans to the aftermath of the global financial crisis in 2008, for example. So in both of these cases is where you had a small amount of people, corrupt and / or incompetent, which had a huge effect on larger markets and larger people, ultimately causing a lot of normal people suffering because of their actions. This in particular being that the flood, I think it was like the floodgates or the flood protections for typhoons, hurricanes, things like that, were inadequate in New Orleans, and this was due to, I believe, government and people corruption / incompetence, and they knew that these levees weren't going to hold well, and this ended up flooding and then causing a lot of people suffering. Same thing with the GFC. People were messing around with money, other people's money in banks, using CDCs, collateral debt, CDOs, collateral debt obligations, I believe they were, essentially levering up, giving money out to people who probably shouldn't have money so that they could make more money. And this eventually spread to the wider market, so that even though here in Australia, I don't know if we had these particular things going on in our economy, I don't believe so, the US was able to affect us. Obviously, that's a very bad thing. But you could use similar examples and go, okay, but are there ways of channeling the natural forces of let's say a volcano, then or a dam, and of a waterfall to make a hydroelectric power plant, channel that energy into good use? Can these financial markets also have a similar thing where that energy is being put into good use, and that people who, for example, were perhaps on the lower end of the financial spectrum were able to make a lot of money quickly, get out of it, and then their lives are now better from that? There's questions to be raised, I think, from this, and that I don't think the book, there's one kind of little critique of the book, I don't think it's really gets into too much in the aftermath of what exactly happened in the periods after this. How much suffering did these financial bubbles cause to people? Because there were certainly winners and losers from these. There was people who were financially poor and then, made a better life for themselves. There were people who were rich and lost a whole bunch of money. Usually a lot of people would say the Gini coefficient of having these large scale differences in between the haves and the have-nots in society. If it gets too big, that's bad. And so bring it down to a more natural level, these financial bubbles, do they do that? It's hard to know. That's something I'd really like to have known. So one thing this book has changed and altered my opinion of is the free markets. And I used to be of the opinion that the free market's a good thing. This is what you want. it's a kind of unilateral good. Every time that free markets are distorted is when you have the human suffering and the unrealities of things that you'll see, like in the Soviet Union, or just very distorted markets, which it's like getting away from the truth of the world. It's kind of altered my opinion in that it's much like that quote that's always given to Winston Churchill. Everyone gives quotes to Winston Churchill, so I don't know how much to believe of that nowadays or not. But that democracy is not the best form of government; it's simply the least worst. And I'm slightly sliding towards the view, or at least it's opened my mind to the possibility that the same thing could be said of free markets, and that a free market is simply the least worst form of having a market, because the regulations and things like that, I don't think they work. I think they ended up cause more suffering to humans and financial repression, coercion, things like that. Yet the amount of bribery, fraud, corruption, backstabbing, lying, and manipulation across all of these free markets, financial bubbles is off chops. The amount of bullshit that you just see people doing in this book was wild. It just staggering. And I would describe these financial bubbles as, this is where you could argue, okay, but the government was, or other people, government in particular, was fucking around with the money. They were doing things that forced people to financially speculate. And I think there is a case for that. So you could say that the cause of these financial bubbles is not a free market, and so therefore these things happen. I don't know. This is getting into like second, third order effects. If you have a free market, shouldn't that then correct the imbalances that you see from non-free markets? I don't know. All I'm saying is that I can't view them as universally good as I once thought, because the evidence in this book, it doesn't really align with that. So humans are mostly good, but there's still enough shit ones, and circumstances exist that will make or force or tempt normal people to do some dodgy shit, is all I can say on that. So very, very interesting in that regard. Let's jump onto the author, perhaps some extra details. The author, Edward Chancellor, was born in 1962, financial journalist, historian, worked in banks. I believe he's English. Not much extra on him to talk about, but so much extra that I couldn't fit into this book review. So I took extensive notes, a ridiculous amount of notes. And I will be doing another side piece to this whole book on financial speculation. I'm not going to be doing it on this channel like Juan does with his extra learnings. I'm going to be putting it on the main Mere Mortals channel. Two reasons for this. One is we've got a gap coming up in that episode, in our normal recording, where Juan's going to be away, so I will do a solo-sode, so I think there's a perfect opportunity for that. And then the second is I want to expand it out past the book and make some predictions for the next financial bubble that I think is going to happen, related particularly to crypto in 2025, i.e. this year. In particular, the Banana Zone, which is a shirt I am wearing right now, which captures this idea that there's going to be a bubble and it's going to be pretty wild. So look out for that on the Mere Mortals channel in probably about 2 to 3 weeks' time. I will try to include a link down below if I remember in 3 weeks' time. Another thing that I just wanted to add on this book was it's just such a strange ending to the book. So the ending in particular was kind of the conclusion. So epilogue, the case of the rogue economists, and it's 23 pages long. It was a bit baffling to me. I didn't understand, because I found the book relatively neutral. I thought he just presented really nice facts. It was engaging, interesting, but the ending of this was, I think, where he chucked in a lot of his opinions, which is fine. It's his book. He can do whatever the hell he wants. I just found it baffling. So, for example, it talks about long-term capital management right at the end here, which is a hedge fund which existed, I think, in the 1990s. They had, these quants, Nobel laureates, I believe, the Myron-Scholes equation, which was to do with pricing of markets and things like this. And they ended up basically just levering up like crazy, 100x leverage on their capital, and blowing up because they weren't as smart as they thought they were. This was it, and then he was using this as an example of saying, like, this is why we need governments to regulate, to stop things like this, to not let these financial bubbles get out of control, because this is what people do with them. If they're not fraudulent, then they're idiots and they fuck it up for everyone else. This just seemed really out of place for me, because from what I understood, this was a non-speculative hedge fund. They tried to make money off of essentially arbitrage and big bets on very unrisky things, but their risk management didn't capture individual tiny little events, and they missed out on these kind of black swan things that could happen. And I thought it was the darling of the ivory tower, because it had all of these, Nobel laureates and very smart professors and things like this. And I thought also of the government of itself. I thought, I didn't live during that time period, so perhaps I'm wrong on this. Well, I did live, but I was, a baby. So it was one of those ones where I'm just like, the casualness that he threw out of suggesting financial repression was a good thing. Capital controls are a good thing. It just kind of staggered me a bit. I didn't understand how everything I read in this book seemed to suggest that capital controls, financial repression didn't work and exacerbated these things. So I just didn't really understand where he got that from. We spent a whole book of time after time seeing how these speculators get around the rules, and that the rules are either ineffective or incentivize extra crazy behavior. But, maybe we just need another 500 years of testing, and this time we'll get it right, So I don't know. The ending seemed rather strange for me. So just a little extra detail there. Summary, similar books, recommendations. While on the topic of qualms with this book, I honestly wish he'd written this a decade later to include the dot-com bubble and the GFC, because this book is fascinating. I love this book. Reading this was so much fun. So much fun. I've learned a whole lot from it. Despite the strange ending, I found it both broad and penetrating in terms of its analysis of what it presented. I found the style of the writing excellent, engaging, mini stories that you came up throughout with history, interesting tidbits of just I don't know, it wasn't hard to read. I've just found it really, really fascinating. Extremely useful of human behavior, psychology, of being able to predict these things. I think, I'm considering it extremely useful for myself, considering what I think is going to be another financial bubble coming up. And I want to try and predict it. I want to try and use the learnings I've got from this to be able to pick when I think a top will be. And if I get within a month or two of it, I reckon that'll be vindication of what I've learned from this book. So stay tuned for that on the Mere Mortals channel. So fantastic book. Loved it. 8.5 out of 10. Devil Take The Hindmost by Edward Chancellor, with the subtitle A History of Financial Speculation. Similar books, recommendations. It reminds me of things like The Big Short Inside the Doomsday Machine, which is also a pretty good movie, The Big Short. I think, was it Michael Scott who wrote that? That's a great book. If you, in the similar sense that it doesn't really deal with the numbers, it's more about the stories related to the people, the feeling of the time, and an explanation of how these bubbles occurred. If you want something once more against the feeling of the time, we have done The Great Gatsby by Scott Fitzgerald, which gives a feeling of the 1920s, I believe. And also the Aspen Papers by Thomas Hardy, who also, Henry James, takes place in these time periods, and two of the time periods that are mentioned in this book. And those book reviews are on this channel if you want to go check them out. It's also inspired me to read The Gilded Age by Mark Twain, which, funnily enough, takes place in the Gilded Age. So that will be jumping up into these book reviews, and once I get my hand on that book, I will certainly be reading that in short order. So that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. This is a Value for Value podcast. I do all of these podcasts free, available anytime, anywhere, any place for anyone. All I ask is that you provide some value back. There's never going to be any sponsorships, nor ads, nor anything like that on this channel. So I just ask that you provide some value in return. You can do that in many ways. Time, share this with a friend if you think that they would enjoy this channel in these book reviews. Word of mouth really, really helps out. Talent, give me some book reviews or books that I should read that you want me to recommend or read on this channel and do a review of. I really love hearing those. And then finally, you can send some treasure in as well. We have a PayPal link down below and some other options available, meremortalspodcast.com/support. So that's it for today. I am live as usual on Wednesdays. I had to change things up on Christmas and on today because I was not hungover. I was just tired because I stayed up to watch the fireworks, So I was a little bit later today than normal, and as I was on Christmas. But I will be going back to that 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday. Would really love if you can join me in the future live. What is coming up? So I have next week will be the mysterious. It won't be so mysterious because I've still got to put a schedule out. So mysterious up until now. Book review coming out of an autobiography, which is not normal for this channel or for me in particular, but has a very close personal connection to myself. It's probably going to be a bit of a heartfelt book review, that one. So that one's coming up. what am I also reading at the moment? Well, I'm going to do a review of this here, which is The Alchemist or O Alquimista. I have both of these books here, one written in English with the translation and then the original in Portuguese. So it's not going to be a book review of The Alchemist because I've already done that before, but it will be on translations in general, which is also tying into a comment I received recently from one of our fans of the channel, Cole McCormick, who was asking about the translation I read of the Odyssey, because there's a movie coming out of that in the next year or two, and there was a little bit of social media controversy or something like that. I don't know. So that's coming up. I've already mentioned The Gilded Age. What am I reading? This book just over there. I can't see it. I also have behind me How the World Really Works, Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I'm not sure if I'll read that. That's a pretty big book. Anne of Green Gables and The Man Who Was Thursday by Chesterton, and that's probably going to go high up on the list as well. So whole bunch of stuff coming up. Day Bang by Rush V. A whole bunch of stuff coming up. So don't worry, there is going to be plenty of book reviews coming up of this in this channel on the next 5 months at the very least. When I go traveling, I still intend to read and do book reviews, so that'll just be a little bit more chaotic in terms of timing because I'm going to be in Europe and things like that. So lots of fun stuff coming up. I really do. I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. And ciao for now. Kyron out. Happy New Year. Bye.